Our next speaker is Kaleem Caire.
Does the clicker work? Okay. Hi, I'm Kaleem Caire. I am the founder, CEO of One City Schools. We're based in Madison, Wisconsin in the United States, and I have quite a few pictures to show you. I like to tell a story with pictures. And I'll share a little bit more about myself as I go through this. But as we're talking about Anji Play and how we expand this in China, but also throughout the world, I wanted to give people an understanding of why we chose to do this at One City, because a lot of people know that we were fortunate to be the first school outside of mainland China to work to implement this model, but there was a particular reason for it. And when we think about taking on new things, regardless if it's something that was designed down the street or something that was designed in another country, when we're going to try to implement something, especially in the area of education, which affects people, we have to consider the historical, social, and cultural context that we want to implement these strategies in. So when I think about how we expand Anji Play, I want to start you off in a second about giving you the history of why we chose to do this and the social and cultural context that we're doing Anji Play in. I'll then talk a little bit about One City Schools. I'm not going to go into too much of that because Carol talked some about that yesterday. But then a strategy for how we go global. I know we wanted to have more of a conversation about that, so I'm not going to go too heavy into that because we want to get to people's questions. But let me just get started here. So a historical context. Give you a history. I'm clearly African American. My people came to the United States first in 1619. That was when the first slaves were landed on the continent of the United States from the continent of Africa. And it was 246 years later that slavery was rendered unconstitutional. But 150 years ago, President Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation to eliminate slavery in the 10 Confederate states in the South. And when he did that, he did so primarily for economic reasons. If they were going to bring the North and the South together, we needed to change the productivity function, which was slavery of the South, and eliminate that to bring it into a more industrialized. We were trying to industrialize like Europe. We needed to address that situation. So he did it for that reason, and also there were moral reasons as well, that there were legislators and people, missionaries who felt that slavery was wrong. So there were multiple reasons, but primarily it was financial. On December 6, 1865, the Secretary of State at the time, William Seward, announced that the bill to establish the 13th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which eliminated slavery, was adopted and passed. The reason why we had to go back to change the Constitution, because even though Lincoln issued a proclamation, it was not binding. And so there were a lot of Confederate states and plantation owners that resisted allowing their slaves to leave. At the time, nearly 90% of all black people in the United States were in slavery. Immediately, the administration of President Andrew Johnson, after that happened, passed what we call restrictive black codes to control the labor and behavior of former slaves in the South. The plantation owners were not ready to let go of the engine that fueled American society. I tell people that we were the horses, we were the manufacturing, we were the machines that made America function. We did all the agricultural work, we did the building of the homes, we built the White House, we did all of that. They used our manual labor, and they needed that labor. They wanted that labor because they did not want to eliminate their economics, their stream of income. So they passed these codes, and these codes were actually worse than slavery. They severely restricted the rights of free black people also. About 10% of black people were free. Black people could not have the freedom to assemble. We couldn't group together. We couldn't bear arms. We couldn't carry weapons. We couldn't become literate. We weren't allowed to learn how to read. We couldn't speak freely. And we couldn't testify against whites in court, because imagine if we could do that, we could probably win our freedom. On May 18, 1896, the U.S. Supreme Court upheld the constitutionality of state laws requiring racial segregation in public facilities under the doctrine of separate but equal. So there was a period in between the ending of slavery where black people had a tremendous amount of hope. Some of us, including my great-great-grandfather John Pierce, who was a legislator in Louisiana for 2 years before the Ku Klux Klan, a white supremacy group, ran him out of the state and ran a lot of African Americans out of office. We fought to try to gain our footing in American society. And this law allowed states across the country to basically create up a separate system for us where we would still live in a system of inequality. This period was known as Jim Crow. It lasted for 88 years. And it was debilitating to black people because after we came out of slavery, we had a tremendous amount of hope, but that hope was dashed again when we weren't allowed the opportunity to really fully participate in American society. Then they passed the Civil Rights Act in 1964, which ended all legal forms of discrimination in public accommodations, not private. That came in the early 1980s. People who privately, like golf clubs and what else? It would be if you had a private restaurant or something, you could still discriminate against us if you choose to do. But public accommodations, segregation and discrimination was effectively eliminated. Now imagine, not everybody came along willingly even when that happened, but we at least got a law on the books. To continue to advance the liberty of African Americans, they passed the Voting Rights Act in 1965, making it easier for Southern blacks to register to vote. At the time, the way they restricted our right to vote, they created literacy tests in the South. They had poll taxes where we had to pay to go to vote, and other forms of other requirements that restricted black people's ability to vote in the United States. So even though we were gaining our freedom, there were still laws that people were passing, states were passing to try to overcome our ability to participate fully in American society. In 1968, the Civil Rights Act, President Johnson signed that bill that the Congress passed, and that ended discrimination in the sale, rental, and financing of housing. A lot of people wonder, why are so many African Americans in the United States poor? I would tell people, well, white people had a 3 to 4 generation head start on us in gaining wealth, because in some places we weren't allowed to own homes, so we weren't able to build equity. We didn't own anything. We couldn't own businesses. Some places they wouldn't allow us to buy cars. I mean, it was pretty ridiculous. So we lived under this form of oppression for quite some time. The last major civil rights bill really was 1991. That addressed, among other things, giving individuals who could prove they were discriminated against legally the right to sue their employer and seek punitive damages, get some money from that, hopefully get some reprieve. But from 1619 until 1991, that was 372 years or 18 generations of legalized forms of discrimination against African Americans in the United States of America. And so I would ask people, we've been in the civil rights era in the United States where we've got laws on the books to help us ensure that we could be full participants in American society, but that was only 54 years ago. So do we think we've done enough in 54 years to overcome 372 years of oppression that African Americans lived under legally in the United States? And most sane people say absolutely not. We haven't done enough. Now in the case of education, which we're here for, I'm not going to have you read all of this, but essentially there were a lot of rebellions and plantations back during slavery. Black people just didn't become slaves willingly. And even when we were enslaved, there were always violence and people trying to flee and fighting to get away from their oppressor and to take their revenge out on their oppressor on these plantations in the South of the United States. But there was one particular one that was pretty heinous. There's a movie about it that came out a couple of years ago. Nat Turner decided he had a vision from God. He went up to Virginia, the Hampton Roads area, and he slaughtered a number of white families. He and a number of others. They were killed by the militia and what we would call police back then. But to overcome these type of issues and insurrections, they called them, or people trying to gain their freedom, they passed a number of laws to prevent us from learning how to read, because Nat Turner was a very well-educated slave. And so the state legislature, this is an example in Mississippi, which is one of our 50 states, passed a law that required all free African Americans to leave the state so that they would not be able to educate or incite the slave population. And there were other, I thought I had one more in here where black people were basically, the laws were passed between 1831 and 1838 where you could not educate us. If you educated us, you could go to jail or be killed yourself. So we lived through this. So how are black people or African Americans faring in the United States today? I want to focus on my community, Dane County, which like Angie County is a county of about 600,000 people in the state of Wisconsin. In our schools, we measure students based on generally their reading and math ability and proficiency, meaning that they're actually reading at the grade level that they're in. So if they're in first grade, they should be reading at first grade. If they're in sixth grade, they should be reading at sixth grade. Well, in our state, we test children across the state in third, fourth, and fifth grade. And the numbers that it showed in our county, which is 16 school districts, only 11% of black children were reading at grade level in our schools, in all 16 school districts. Only 11%. Only 15% of our Hispanic population, and you can see our Asian and white population weren't doing that well either. However, the white population number was one of the best in the country at the time. So we have a crisis in education in the United States. And unfortunately, there are a lot of people working on it, but we're not spending enough time on it. I'll breeze past this, but basically what this shows is that the data is worse for our kids. So if you look at black children in our neighborhood that our school serves, only 9% of our children read at grade level. Only 15%. Now this is all of our kids in what you would consider in China to be your primary schools. We call them elementary schools. All the kids, only 9%, less than 10% of them read at grade level. Now we know that early childhood education, there's many, many studies that show the impact of early childhood education, even working with mothers and fathers and prenatally even before they have children, educating them about the importance of taking care of your children and how women have the nutrition that they need to have while they're having children or childbearing. All those programs we know have a positive impact along with preschool education. Unfortunately, it's not readily available in our communities in the United States. And where it is available, it's very costly. So this is what it costs to get a preschool education in our community in Madison, Wisconsin. Very expensive. On the left-hand side, this is for a 1 to 2-year-old, because many of our families, most parents work, and most parents need some place for their child to be after they have that child when they go to work. So most people who have children who are 1 and 2 years old are generally in their early to mid-20s to their early to mid-30s. And they don't necessarily make a lot of money because they're not that well established in their careers. But if they come from parents that have money, they can get some help. But it costs $17,000 a year on average just to send your child to a preschool in our community. But you look all the way over to the right, to get a degree at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, which is one of the top research universities in the country and in the world, it only costs $10,000 to go there for the year. So it costs more to get a preschool education at a time when you don't have much money than it does much later when your parents actually do have some money, most likely. We also know that more than 60% of African Americans in our county live in poverty. And so the ability to afford preschool education is very challenging. So a framework for action. So Nelson Mandela said education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. And the reason I've spent the last 25 years of my life focused on this particular issue is because my community has spent the last 150 plus years for the same reason. We knew that education was a passport to both power and equality in our country, and it has been something that for decades was held back from us. And at this point in time where we perform so poorly, it is something that we still desperately need. It is the greatest equalizer in our country, and from what I heard from your leadership, it's one of the greatest equalizers in your country as well. I'm not going to go through this. This is just to show you. Happy to share it with you later. But there is actually a framework for one city schools. In the United States, we got to have a framework for everything. We just can't have a great idea. If you have a great idea, Angie Playwright, where's your research evidence? What are you going to do for teacher training? What is your curriculum? Where are the books at? What do the books say? How thick are the books, right? We go through all of that. And so we created a framework for our schools. I did this actually several years ago in Washington, D.C., and just modified it, where basically the black area is the foundation. If we have good public policy like in Anji, you now can have Anji schools and resources to support those schools. We can actually do good things for children, and also if we have good community support. If parents in our community, if they come to schools, but also preschool, if they're knowledgeable and aware of how they can help their children, which we've heard Ms. Chung and others talk about how much they work with families, is really important. We can really help children. And then we got to have people that actually know what they're doing. So all these principals and people in Ms. Chung's school and her as a leader, they know what they're doing, and so that's why it works. But we have to have that. In the middle, we have to have great teachers. We have to have great people running those schools. We have to have a curriculum that makes sense. We have to have suitable facilities. Imagine trying to do an Anji play experiment in a facility that there was no playground, you know, and the walls and the rooms were really small. In our country, we educate kids in preschool in apartment buildings all over the place with no place for them to go run and play. And then health and safety issues also. And then at the top in our country, trying to give kids early exposure to what it's going to be like as they go forward in school is really important. So we put together a framework. I heard others talk about this also in their presentations. They just didn't give you the big cute circle. This is a sociological ecological model based on sociology and psychology that basically says there are a number of things that impact us in our lifespan. At the micro, the yellow, the meso, which is the orange, and the green, which is the macro level. There are a number of institutions, there are a number of people within those bands that have an impact on us, and the more we have a positive impact, a positive relationship with those entities and those people, the more likely we are to be successful. So what we've done at our school is we said, you know what, we're going to engage every single entity and every single individual in all three of those circles to have a positive impact for our children. And I'm just going to share with you how. So we started one city. We started with, first we had one preschool. We started with 6 children in a church. We've now grown to 90 children. We'll have 116 in the fall. We're split into 2 schools now, preschool, and then in the fall we're going to turn our senior preschool into a primary school, elementary school, and we're going to continue to grow with our children from age 1 all the way through 12th grade, which is secondary school. The younger part of our program, parents have to pay for, so we cover a lot of scholarships. We've paid for over $100,000 in scholarships so far this year to help families afford our school. And then our public school, which is the charter school, is actually free to families, and the reason why we went charter is so that we could make it free to families. So our purpose is to prepare children for school success, leadership, and life. Our mission is to ensure that they actually are ready to succeed by the time they enter kindergarten and beyond, and that they're ready for that experience. Our goal is to cultivate creative problem solvers, thoughtful, caring, and ethical leaders, social and scientific innovators, and good community stewards and global citizens. You see a lot of parallels between us and all the things we've talked about Anji play, and we started this work actually before we connected with Anji. We also had to have an effective team. This is just a picture of my team. We have a very diverse team. Everybody works really hard in this school. As Carol can tell you, nobody does it, just sits down. So there's a lot going on at our schools. And Ms. Chung, when you came and met with us, we didn't have, I think we had like 3 or 4 people at the time. So our school has grown. We also have to have an effective approach. And so our approach starts with first what we do with our families. We have to have a really strong relationship with our parents because we are not only trying to move our children forward, we understand that to move them forward, we also have to move their parents. We have a 2-generation model as a result. We actually help our families connect with job opportunities in our community, job training, educational opportunities. We have parents that have PhDs that couldn't get a job at the university, and we used our relationships to help do that. We have a lot of parents that don't have a degree at all, and we've helped them also gain access to employment so that they can help support their families. Our families are really engaged in our school. As you can see, we have a very diverse crowd of families in our community. Although we are based in a majority poor African-American neighborhood, people didn't think we would get white families to come to our school. I said, well, if it's good, they're going to come. And now our challenge is trying to make sure we get enough families in our school that really need it, and we keep those families because a lot of other families are trying to get in there now. We have programs that work directly with helping our parents learn how to interact with their children and do play-based things that they can do with their children at home, but have really good dialogue and critical conversations with their children, but learn how to nurture and develop them. You see, this gentleman here in the red shirt, unfortunately, he passed away last week, had a stroke, was under a lot of pressure, but he was one of our dads that got deeply involved in the program that we have, and in our community, our country, the involvement of African American fathers is fleeting. Not enough involvement, but we've managed to actually boost that in our school. This is another family that went through one of our programs, and the founder of that program called the FAST program. So we've been trying to bring the best to our families. We also have a program where we give our families discounts that they could get any discount that's available in the United States is drawn by this organization, which gives them access to it at their computer. So we've had parents get $5,000 discounts on cars and vehicles and other things. So everything we can do to make life manageable. I'm going to bypass that for the sake of time. It just showed a lot of things we do with our families. We also have to have our core, which is the Angie Play curriculum. And I'm not going to go all the details of this because everybody up here has talked about the details of Angie Play. I could give you another 2-hour dissertation and probably be wrong. But these are the 5 guiding principles. And I just wanted to show how it relates to us. We look at the love part of it as the core to our school culture. How we want people and children and everyone to feel when they're at our school every day. And also the relationship that extends to our children at home and in the community. We want our children to take risks. We want them to challenge themselves and not be afraid to challenge themselves. In the black community, we can be so authoritarian with our children. Don't do this, don't go there, don't talk to them, don't do this. And it's because of the fear-based environment we've been raised in over those 300 plus years. We're trying to root that out of our families, which is why it was so critical to connect to a program like Angie Play. Engagement, deep learning, like giving time, like these kids time to actually deeply engage in the work that they're doing and the things that they find that they're passionate about and they find interesting. And then the reflection, we didn't even have this figured out, that we didn't think about that until we saw the play sharing and the storying that children are doing. But that's critical to what we're trying to do for our children. This is just a picture I stole from you, Jesse. That's on your website of our children. That's my daughter, actually, on the far left-hand side of the screen. I brought her to the school so she would understand how challenging it is to have children too young, so she will delay childbearing. There's our first meeting with Ms. Chung and Jesse. She came to our school. She actually came to our school 2 times and actually helped us think about, her and her team, how to actually design elements of our school. I don't know if she thought we were taking her seriously, but we changed some of our plan, the whole plan for our outdoors and indoors, just to make our facility more Angie-like. These are some of our children. You know, these are our girls deeply engaged in their activity. You can see some of the boys in the background. This is some of the things they do indoors. I don't know what that is. It looks like a teepee with an office building underneath it. But our kids, we have so many photos. I just pulled this one out. But our kids are engaging in all kinds of stuff. And the same thing that you see children doing here, when you give them those materials, you see them doing that in our community as well. These are our 1-year-olds. So I know Angie goes to 3-year-olds, but we actually start with 1, so we have materials available for them too. And at least she's sharing, you know. And they can lift them. This is something we did just to get the community an opportunity to participate in it. We had over 200 families come. You can see Ms. Chung there in a nice yellow dress in the back. But we've done a lot to try to connect with community members, and one of our partners at the library is doing a great job with that as well. And this is a recent picture, a story that was published 2 weeks ago in our newspaper about Angie Play and what we're doing. They took a picture of some of our kids, and I'm like, could you have had them like put the stuff back before you took the picture? But they're enjoying it, and some of the things we do indoors. We also do other things. This is for our people who are interested in this. We have a healthy meals program. It's not just kids playing all day. We actually try to adjust their diets. A lot of our kids eat high-fat, high-carb diets, and we're trying to change that. So we have a full-time chef who cooks for them 2 times a day and also makes a prepared snack, and he cooks real stuff. This is a cooking show we did with our families, and this is the kind of stuff that they make and our kids eat every day. So they're not just eating box lunches. And this is a dessert, and there's a mint leaf on top, and it's got kiwi on the bottom, and it's got yogurt of some kind, and it was really good. But this is what the kids get every day. And then the relationship, the partnership that we have with Angie Play. And I'm thinking as we go out into the world and we think about how to expand this, as we've gone through this, Jesse and Ms. Chung, it's been instructional to us as to how to do this going forward. The amount of time and energy that we've spent getting to know each other and getting to visit with each other has been pretty significant. And it really building a relationship. So wherever Angie goes, having a relationship with the entities that you're partnering with and that the entities are partnering with Angie is going to be really important. This is Ms. Chung and Jesse talking to some of our donors. And this gentleman on the far right and his wife, Joe, actually came to China with me. He became the chair of our board after this meeting. And he's given our school over $300,000. He's helped us raise over $5 million for our school. And he was so taken aback by having these two individuals there. And everyone in this room has contributed significantly to our school. So being connected is really important. This is us coming to China and getting to know some of the people who are really looking at this model here and getting invested in it as well. So there's a real sharing that needs to take place. These are our teachers, the first group of teachers that we bought last fall for a residency program that Angie Play created for our teachers, because if we're going to do this correctly, we want to do it the way Ms. Chung and her team has learned to do it and has evolved and do it correctly. We don't want to try to do it our own way. So this is them at one of the schools. This is Jabari and Molly building something and having a great time doing it. But this is part of the requirement, too, of their work was actually engage in it. So they understood. This is them doing reflection with Chelsea Bailey. And I was taking the picture, and then she told me to get out. So I did what she told me to do. But you also have to have supportive policymakers. And it was awesome to see the people who came here. Because in education, it takes money to do this work. And there are policies that both support us and inhibit or restrict what we can and cannot do. And so this was Ms. Chung coming to visit. This is our mayor on the right-hand side. He's like looking, he's thinking. He's not mad, he's thinking. But, and that was our economic development leader sitting next to him. And we were having a good conversation. This is us meeting with her, one of the village leaders here in China. So again, building that strong relationship is really important. And then also, this is our county executive. So like we have Angie County, this is our county executive, Joe Parisi, the tall gentleman in the middle there. Again, meeting with Ms. Chung and Jesse and Chelsea. Again, building that partnership and getting to know each other. Then this is philanthropists. These are our biggest hospital in the state, has given us significant resources, and this is them having a good time sitting in our newly refurbished classroom. And this is our now current governor, Tony Evers. He was our state superintendent of education. This was us visiting with him before he came and visited our school. And this is him right after he was elected. He was at a technology council meeting, which I'm now on the board of, and he shouted out one city, and he mentioned Angie Play as being revolutionary, and how he told the business community we need to connect the dots between early childhood and what they do in the workforce. So having these type of relationships and building this takes time. This is another philanthropist that helped us buy our building. We now own our school. And then these are some other ladies that have been tremendously helpful, and I'm almost done here. But this is just the other day. This was last week, or no, this was 2016. We got some press about Angie Play, and I'm saying this because if you're going to build this where you are, you cannot build it in a vacuum. People have to know what you're doing. And you don't want to oversell what you're doing. Like, we don't tell people we're Angie Play experts. We just tell people what Angie Play is about and what we're trying to do and how it could be beneficial to our community and how they can help us. And we keep ourselves out there in the public eye. And so this was 2016. We had a recent story that was in the newspapers I sent to Jesse about Angie Play specifically that he was quoted in, and some other great things that we've done. And this is the last thing I'm going to show you is our facility. We made a lot of changes to this old rickety facility. This is the oldest child care center in Dane County, second oldest in our state. We put a new fence up. We did some new things. So look at that closely, because this is what it looked like in the back before we fixed it up. And when Ms. Chung helped us design the back, this is what it looks like now. So we put some rolling hills. You see, we came to Angie. We saw how to cover the materials. We extended our playground actually twice. This is the back. Before, we couldn't really use the space. Now we've created a fence that goes around all the spaces there, and when you come there now, you'll see even more change in that particular area. So the investment of resources and trying to create an Anji-like environment is really critical to the expansion of these programs too. This is the side of our building, which when you looked at it before, there was overgrown bushes, and we really tried to spruce it up a lot. So lastly, as Mandela started us out with the power of education, it always seems impossible until it's done, right? And so for us, we literally every day think it's impossible. I mean, seriously, I have to go back. I have to raise $600,000 between now and June 15th. And in the last week, we raised 200 since I've been here. And it's because people are hearing about what we're doing, they're believing in what we're doing, and they see, okay, it could be impossible, but we get them involved with it, it can be done. So I want to thank you for your time. I'm happy to take your questions when we get to that. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, reminding us the critical importance of understanding the socio-cultural and political context of our children and families. Thank you.